Hi, I'm Josh Levine, and welcome to the first episode of What It's Like to Be You. This is a show where I interview people about their experience as their Enneagram type. I'm really curious about what is it like to be you on the inside. The show has a few purposes. The first is that it's an Enneagram show. It's just for your educational purposes. I'm hoping that it humanizes the Enneagram. A lot of times the Enneagram can exist in students as a kind of disembodied concept that doesn't make its way back into where it really lives, which is inside people. So I'm hoping to reveal the way the Enneagram actually lives inside people through these conversations. Second is that this is a show about self-reflection and introspection itself. I believe that these capacities of self-awareness and introspection and inner work are existential to our species and our planet. Most conversations about today's challenges pertain to the outer world. For example, where does money flow? Who has resources? How do we improve our schools? These kinds of things. And those are important. But equally important are the hidden questions about the inner world. For example, how do we become kinder in a real way? How do we transcend our biases? How do we cultivate awareness of our habitual patterns and transcend who we have become just through sheer force of the momentum of growing up and developing our own defensive mechanisms and become the wise, compassionate, mature adults that we were always meant to be? So, without further ado, welcome to the first episode.
What I bring to the Enneagram, what a lot of people appreciate about my approach is that, I might be provocative and whatever else, but I'm going to leave a mark on you. I'm going to leave, because I'm usually only focusing on the parts that leave the biggest marks.
My first guest is a man named Emeka Okorafor. Emeka is the co-founder of Enneagrammer.com and a co-host on the Big Hormone Enneagram Podcast. He is a Type 8, and he is blunt and provocative in the style of Type 8s, and he is very self-aware about using his type structure for a purpose, throwing his weight around, causing some trouble in the Enneagram world, as we'll see. I really respect Emeka a lot, and I hope that's clear in our conversation. I'm very excited for you to learn from him in this conversation. One final thing is that I think you'll experience Emeka to be a very powerful presence in the way that Type 8s can be, and 8s have this way of just by being themselves kind of galvanizing you, kind of lighting you up from the inside, like revving the engine. And I found myself experiencing that in this conversation, and I'm curious if you experienced that too. So, without further ado, I'm very excited to introduce you to my friend, Emeka.
All right, so for people who are just meeting Emeka, I'm really excited to talk to you about Enneagram stuff and also about you in particular. Mm-hmm. And my point of view about you and your content in the Enneagrammer universe is that it's really fresh and modern, a new take on the Enneagram that's really unearthing really new, fresh insights. Mm-hmm. And I would say that kind of part of your, as I'm characterizing it, your kind of personal brand in the Enneagram world mm-hmm. is being both very precise with your language and type distinctions, but also being very blunt with your way of being and expressing yourself.
Right.
Sometimes off-putting, always thought-provoking.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
It's a good way to sum it up.
So was that fair? How do you feel about all that characterization?
No, that's great. That's a generous introduction.
Cool. Can you just tell us, like, take us on the journey, like Enneagram origin story. How did you discover it? How do you know your type? Oh, and by the way, Enneagram, Emeka is a Type 8.
Yes.
Self-identified.
That's important to know. Yeah.
That's important to know. Yeah. Type 8, and to get really specific about it, sexual self-pres Type 8 with a 7-wing tri-type 8-5-4. Correct?
That's it. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
So yeah, I mean, my origin story.
Yeah, go ahead.
So yeah, I got into the Enneagram. The Enneagram kind of was bunched into typology. Like, if anyone's been online searching for MBTI information, you'll inevitably run into people who are also interested in the Enneagram, who are, how people have on their signature, they'll have their MBTI type and then they'll have their Enneagram type. So at some point I'd ran into that. I'm like, what the hell are these symbols and numbers? I think I'd seen somebody who'd posted 5-wing 4, sexual self, SX/SP. And I'm like, what does that mean? So of course that leads you down a rabbit hole. So I initially thought that the Enneagram was just, another typology or inner work or spirituality system to figure out. I've been, getting into so many of these my entire life. And I guess to go back, why am I interested in this stuff? I think I grew up looking at my parents. I'm a sexual type. And so I think there's a way that I'm always tracking romantic partnerships, to sort of understand why people get and stay together. And my parents were always contentious. Like they always fought all the time. And I remember thinking to myself, I'm going to grow up and I'm not going to be in a relationship like that. And I also wanted to try to understand what it was about certain people that gelled together and why certain people just never worked. And so that sort of led me into the study of personality, or any of these like psychological systems that could help explain why people were the way they were. So I think one of my first books that I ever bought for myself was like a birth order book, which eventually led to studying MBTI. Anything that was like help me explain why the fuck do people do what they do. So that's been kind of like a hobby I never took seriously. Like, and so I just tend to just collect this information. And so, people talk about what they normally do, like on a Saturday morning when they don't have to do anything. I'm online researching this kind of stuff. And so that is eventually what led me to the Enneagram. But the reason the Enneagram stuck and hooked me to such a strong degree is the fantasy that I always had with typology is that this stuff is useless to me. These ideas about people are great and are interesting, but if I can't apply it in a way that if I walk into a room or an interview or any sort of engagement with someone that I want to influence or understand, this information isn't useful to me if I can't immediately see it at work. So anything I would research or get interested in, I needed to see it. It needed to be alive. Of course, knowing that my type is 8, understanding like shit has to be real. It has to be an immediate thing for me in order for me to, really grab onto it. And so back then, this was about 2006 or 2005. Online, there was I want to give a shout out to the person who introduced me to the Enneagram. Like not introduced me to the Enneagram, but the first website that I found, like Catherine Farver's stuff at the time was the first thing that I came across. And the only reason I mentioned that is because she was one of the few people who was doing typing based on watching people. And I'd never encountered that before. But this is sort of like match the thing that I was trying to do on my own, which is, can I sit here and watch people and figure out what's going on with their type? And so she was doing this type the Oscars thing on her Facebook page back then. And I thought that was really interesting and strange. And that sort of lit a light bulb in my head that, is that possible? Like, you sometimes just watch people, and for me anyways, just that person's probably like this. That sort of people intuition where you're sizing people up was something that I was immediately, or something that I'd always been trying to do my whole life. And so to find that there was a personality system that had implications the way people were presenting in real time was like the biggest deal. And so that began like a personal obsession to learn how to do this. It wasn't like she was teaching how to do that at the time. There wasn't any real courses about that. I just grabbed onto it and started, that's the way I started learning the Enneagram. I did that. I started doing that before, I started even really studying descriptions, because to me, it's like, if it doesn't matter what the description says, if I can't see it happening in real time, it doesn't matter. And so I started with my type. I need to figure out what I am, because I know there's some people in my life that I feel are probably similar to me. And if I can figure out myself first, then I can work backwards from there. And so I started sort of building an internal map of understanding based on understanding my own typing. So I started learning Enneagram by typing myself, trying to figure out how to figure out what my type is accurately. And to do that thoroughly, it took years, because I was just doing it by trial and error. It's like, well, maybe I'm a 7. And so let me go find out what 7 is. Let me find out even more specifically what 7 is. And if I am a 7, just sort of by process of elimination, could I be a 7 or an 8? And so that, could I be this or that, was my method of, well, let me go read about that. I didn't read an Enneagram book from beginning to end. I was reading an Enneagram book or Enneagram books based on questions that I needed to answer. So if, like, what's the difference between a 7 and an 8? Well, there's a thing about, like, the Enneagram has centers. 7 is actually a head type, and and 8 is a body type. Well, just asking those questions. And so before I came across any Enneagram group or hooked up with John or David, I spent a good 6-7 years on my own, just playing around with these ideas, and at the same time practicing how to recognize those types. And eventually, I thought I was initially a 7 because I'm such a fun guy. But
Okay.
but I think I realized that I think I started to, the more I got deeper into it, I started to see that, yeah, I am a body type instead. And the structures of types, there's a lot more nuance to seeing how 7 and 8 could be similar on the surface. There's a lot of differences the deeper you get. And so the more I started to try to understand, okay, how can you make the distinction between 7 or 8? That's how I started to learn that the Enneagram has a structure, and all this confusion, all these confusing things that I was, confusing information that I was relying on to mistype myself. I had to go see deeper than that. And so that's why the Enneagram stuck, because I could never get to the bottom. There was always more nuance. And the more nuance I got, the more the types became distinct worlds. And I was just getting more and more amazed. And not only that, but the implications on trying to pick up how these types would present themselves in real people was the other piece of it that was feeding into my understanding of the types. And also part of it, maybe some people get into the Enneagram and they look at the information that's already available and they try to base their understanding based on that. For me, I mean, this is kind of like an arrogant 8 perspective, is like, if it's not real for me, it's not real. It has to be something that matches my experience. I don't care if it's written in a book. If I can't, see it in practice, then what's the point? So I was building my own understanding. And so based on that, I couldn't see myself as an 8 based on the descriptions that were available. I had to go many levels deeper into seeing, like, these types are not just descriptions, they're type structures. And once you start to look at it, then this is a whole much bigger deal. Personality system. It's way beyond a personality system. Like, it's a really nuanced map of consciousness, more so than anything I'd ever come across. And the reason that I'm still passionate and this is stuck is because this is bigger than anything I could have ever imagined. Is deeper than I haven't even gotten close to the bottom. And so every single year I'm still being blown away by what this is uncovering. And also as a self-development and inner work tool, this has changed my life. It's changed everything about the way I see the world.
Wow. Thank you for all that. That was super rich and layered. And, I'm also a massive Enneagram geek. And so there's so many directions to go with this, but what I'd love to generally hone in on just for this particular video and interview is what it's like to be you, and particularly what it's like to be an 8. And there's a lot in what you just said that could be mined from that perspective. And so one of the things I was just keying into when you were describing your whole Enneagram journey was that it has to be real. If it's not, it's just out there abstract, it's not real for me. Yeah. So what does it mean for something to be real?
Well, trying to understand myself as an 8, being a certain type, it's easy to take for granted certain things about yourself. It took understanding the Enneagram to see that there's so many different ways of being that are very valid compared to mine, but are incredibly different. And so I take it for granted that I can generally make things happen. I can generally go and do things and create things, and even though I'm super geeky and nerdy about things that are abstract, for me it's like, it's what is actionable about this, because the 8 personality is like this disconnection from, like, it's the essential quality of power. And so the personality tries to create this sense of aliveness and through immediacy. And so things are real if they're immediate, if they're now, if they're sort of like there's this immediate kind of charge to it. And every eight, regardless of their instincts, are looking for that sense of aliveness, immediacy. And so for the eight personality, what they're looking for is the thing that has the biggest impact. And so, which means that you can a lot of times end up discounting things that are smaller, because that's what the eight personality is doing to itself. And so what I bring to the Enneagram, what a lot of people appreciate about my approach is that, I might be provocative and whatever else, but I'm going to leave a mark on you. I'm going to leave, because I'm usually only focusing on the parts that leave the biggest marks. So it's like, if you listen to me talk for 5 minutes, I want there to be a before and an after. And that's because my personality is doing that for me. Like I'm only paying attention to the stuff that leaves a mark on me. And so my personality is always shining a light on, this is the part of the Enneagram that can change your life. And so the downside of that is, trying to make that happen for people. Like I'm trying to make a life-changing before after happen. And so, I guess what I've learned is that aliveness is already there. And there's this sense that I'm always responsible to bring this sense of aliveness of, there's a before and after. It's almost like an ignition switch. It's like, where's the ignition in this idea or in this, and to me, typing is like, it's a powerful thing. And the reason people get so upset about typing is that it really eliminates the bullshit. Because if I say that we can look at a type on paper and say, this is a description for 7 or 8 or 4 or 5, and people can identify with it and play all types of games about what that might mean for them. But if you're saying that type is real, that it's happening moment to moment, and that you can take a snapshot of it with a video or a collage, that all of a sudden means that you can't bullshit that. So people have to come face to face with the reality of what they're up to. And it makes inner work a really powerful thing, but it also destroys delusions. And delusions are really comfortable. So if you're the messenger that tells people that their clothes are ugly, or the thing that they've been telling themselves about who they are is bullshit, people don't want to hear that. And so, but it creates an environment where people who are really serious about change and inner work, I think that's what makes our group so great is, people get really upset, but the people who stick around are the ones that are really serious about the Enneagram and making changes in a real way. Because I think the Enneagram can suffer from what generally happens in typology communities of just people delusionally assigning certain traits and types to themselves just to make themselves feel better or to form a sense of community or any of those things. But if you do want to change, if you do want to work on yourself, if you do want to develop, you're going to have to go and face some difficult things. And I want to force people, and that language, force people to look at these types are addressing difficult things, difficult truths. And if you're having a hard time facing the possibility that you're not the type that you think you are, wait till you find out what your actual type is. Like that journey is a difficult road. And so that's part of, my mission is to sort of get people ready for, get people to face the reality of inner work and their type. This is some hard shit. This is really challenging, and it can be really life-changing. But if you can't get through the initial gauntlet of potentially realizing that what you thought about a type is totally wrong, you're in for a huge, it's going to be tough, because part of inner work is realizing that you've been lying and bullshitting yourself, and you're going to have to make some changes, some painful changes about the way you live and about, addressing some of your personality shadows, and all those things are very difficult to do. And so I think part of what my personality does is try to bring that realness, and it's in a sense bringing that negativity, those negative difficult truths, getting people exercises to get used to facing that, to get used to looking at the parts that suck about themselves.
Right. Um, how do you experience your eightness right now? Like right in this moment?
I just feel, I feel amped. I
Uh-huh.
mean, when I'm excited, when I'm into something, uh, it feels like I drank coffee. It feels like, you know, my personality. It's interesting watching other eights because it's easier to see it. Because
Mm-hmm.
I look at other eights and I'm like, man, they're really over the top. They're really intense and they're really like, and I'm like, am I like that? So it's really hard to see. it's it's really hard
Yes,
to see your
yes, you are. You
yeah.
are.
or or just like, I see other eights and I was like, god damn, that person's aggressive.
Uh-huh.
So I know that I'm like that, but it's hard to see it because I mean, I deal with myself every day.
Mm-hmm.
When people sometimes might say that I'm controlling, it really pisses me off because I don't experience
Uh-huh.
myself as controlling, but I can
Uh-huh.
see, watching other eights, it's easy to see like there's no room, like it's the eight personality can feel alienating because it feels like there's only several avenues that you can get in with this person. Like it's gonna be it's controlling, and not the sense that they're telling you what to do. It's controlling in the sense that this personality is so strong in a certain direction and so
Mm-hmm.
seemingly self-assured that it doesn't feel like there's much wiggle room.
Right.
And I think it's also understanding that the majority of people are attachment types.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that majority of people are attachment types. So what they're looking for
Which,
from
real quick, so attachment types are types 3 and 6 and 9, just for
yes,
people.
yes,
Mm-hmm.
some people might consider this controversial to say, but based on the experience that I've had with typing, I really think that at least 80% of the population, at least 75%, that'd be the most conservative I could go. Because even just, in our typing experience with Enneagrammer, it's over 90%, which is
Mm-hmm.
shocking. Um, because I mean, come into the Enneagram expecting that, but it makes sense if you think about how the way the world functions and how people functions. In order for the species to, like, people to reproduce as much as they do, like, you need a sense of inherent psychological attachment to other people, which is what
Uh-huh.
attachment does. But the types that are not attachment types, in some ways, are not doing that at all. Which, if you look at it in the grand scheme, it's really weird and it stands out. So for eight, it's a gut type who is so set on their own kind of way unconsciously, and they don't even realize it, that I
Mm-hmm.
think other people might experience that as, man, this person already knows what they want, and they don't need anything energetically. They're pretty strong, so it doesn't really give you much room to get in there, and
Mm-hmm.
so it feels alienating. And so I see that in other eights, and I'm sure that I give off that energy for multiple reasons. For social blind also, adds to that, and also the 5 and 4 fixes. There's not a lot of my personality that makes me feel like I'm really with people. I'm interesting and I can really pay attention to people, but there's a sense of, the eight personality can feel alienating to the average person.
Do you feel that alienation on the inside?
The I one thing I okay One way to put this, because I had an experience this past year, because I got into a relationship with the sexual six in 2021,
Okay.
and I had the first time that I had this experience. Maybe I've experienced this mildly before,
Yeah.
where something good was happening. I was in a relationship with someone I love. I'm in a relationship with someone I love, and
Mhm.
it doesn't feel like I could even accept that that was happening. So what I was experiencing was a separation, where I was almost like having an out of body experience,
Okay.
where if I was in a situation where something good was happening, it felt like I was watching someone else have that experience. And or I was like, if I'm even I feel separate from even sometimes what's happening for me, which can be a reaction to something good, but also a reaction to something terrible that's happening, where I feel like it can't touch me. And that's
Yeah.
something that, eights can, not just eights, but, eights, fives, and like, can feel separate from their own experience, where it's like,
Right.
even it doesn't feel like what's happening can touch me. And so there's a sense of a wall
Yeah.
with a
Yeah.
lot of eights that, I can see with myself at this point, but that's one way that it's shown up in my life, where in this relationship, I've had moments where I felt separate from what was happening,
Yeah.
where it didn't even feel like it was me.
I'm gonna ask you a leading question on that, but feel free to take it however you want. So this what you're describing is almost it feels like a dissociation, or like there I
Right.
am having an experience, but it's like I'm watching myself have the experience.
Yes.
Which is a kind of thing that we hear a lot when we talk about the 9, but the 8 also experiences this, and their sort of attempted solution at it is, well, if I can just go harder at this thing, then I'll make myself feel alive. I'll bring myself back to the moment.
Mm-hmm.
Is that do you agree with my language, or would you put it differently?
Absolutely. I credit, John for introducing that sense of dissociation is not only a 9 thing, but also an 8 thing, but it's dissociation through immediacy. But it's also kind of dissociation. I would add to that there's a dissociation where I feel cut off, so
Okay.
I can dissociate by just getting on a roll, impulsive, kind of doing the next thing on the table, where I'm not even really present to what's happening, where I just,
Just kind of
there's
barreling forward. Yeah.
yeah, my own momentum. I can get high
Yeah.
on my own momentum. But there's, I don't want to discount that, because there is a real intelligence to that sort of 8-ish momentum. And as an assertive type, I'm sure you can relate on some level, where
Yeah.
there's a intelligence when you're going, when this is what needs to happen next, and I need to do that. But there's a way that, even as a sexual 8, that I've been in situations where I was creating the chemistry, or creating the sweeping her off her feet, whatever thing that I do, before I'm even sure if I'm into it. Whereas, like, I can, there's maybe a small spark. There's a small spark, and there's a small, because I have to be hooked by something, but I can take a little bit of a hook and just create a whole world around it before I'm even sure that it's the thing I should be doing. So I can go 0 to 60 very quickly on something that feels like, there's a small spark, and I'm just like, do 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 do. You know what I mean? So I'm seeing that the A personality can just overdo action as a way to
Right.
dissociate, or
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
can just overdo, the line to 5, where I'm just like, nothing touches me. There's, at certain points where it feels like I'm either doing one or the other, where it's like I'm completely cut off there. The feeling, the way I've described it is that I can feel that maybe something that I was engaging with all of a sudden is on a completely other planet. Like, this thing couldn't even possibly touch me. Like, so there's a way that I can dissociate by completely cutting myself off from something, or by just overdoing, getting into that momentum flow where I'm not even really there.
Right. Right. So, what is inner work like for you? Like, what what do you focus on with inner work, and how does it go? And what's
So,
hard about
okay.
it?
Yeah. Okay. So, one of the hardest things, I think the first thing I had to realize, it's kind of like getting disgusted with your own type, like, seeing it for what it is, that I'm not really, what I've just said, that there's an aspect of not really being there when you're just doing the next thing, or you feel cut off from things. And so, 8s are hard last. And I recognize that I felt like, when I was a lot younger, I was just a much harsher person.
Okay.
Hard to believe, but I was a much, and I think my personality, those who knew me in my late 20s, my best friend would say the same thing, that I've changed a lot,
Mm.
softened up quite a bit. And so one of the first things that I realized, that my dad is an 8, and even growing up, he's a social 8, very hardened, social 8 wing 9.
Mm.
And I knew intuitively I didn't want to turn out like my dad. And that's also one of the things that, got me into the Enneagram, because my dad was like really, really tough.
Okay.
And so it's interesting that I, discovered what my type was, and I'm the same type as my dad.
Mm.
And so it just kind of hit home that in a lot of ways I did become like him, in just like super harsh. I mean, it's hard not to when you grow up with someone like that. You grow up in a family that kind of has, patterns itself after your dad's personality. So everyone's tough. And just recognizing that I didn't need to emphasize that at all. Like, I already have a personality that's, really hard edged in a lot of ways. And that there was no point in my life where I ever needed to push, because it's already going to happen. So that was kind of like the initial message, is like, don't become a caricature of this personality type. Like, there's nothing good about overdoing eightness. And so that was the first kind of step, like seeing the personality do its thing. I already had plenty of examples in my own family, where I was like, man, that's what it's going to cost me later in life if I double down on 8, is you're cut off from everybody. Even though like 8s can be really at the center of the action, there's a way that, because 8s are pushing out so much, that their inner world is so small. Like, there's their inner circle of who they can really be themselves with and really feel, let people in. That's a small world. And so I could see that. And I was like, I don't want to end up like that in 10, 20 years, where because I have such hardened boundaries, even though I might have a large impact on so many people, like the people who actually can get to know me and really see me, very small. And so I think, like, it was kind of like, how do I get in touch with my heart? And there's no easy answer to this. It's not like I have any like ready-made answers for how I've been able to do this. But I will say that just the fact that I've been working with the Enneagram, one thing that it has done is that it's allowed me to have compassion that I didn't have before. Just recognizing that there are 8 other types that are just as equally valid as mine. I mean, when I was a lot younger, I would just say people are fucking stupid. I mean, they're just too slow and too, dumb, just all those, because I just didn't understand where people were coming from. Like, why the fuck would you do this? Why would you react this way? But now understanding that they're all these valid ways. I mean, I might still have these reactions, but I know that they're coming from valid places. So I will say that the Enneagram has allowed me to have compassion that I didn't have before, because it's expanded, helped me understand human beings. And, for 8s, there's a way that they only see what they know, and they're going to make it happen. And so if the 8 doesn't understand the complexities of what humans are capable of, it's either you're getting stuff done or you're making things happen. Either you're helping them do whatever it is that they're doing, or you're in the way. So it can be kind of like real black and white in terms of either you're helping things expand and grow, or you're in the, you're a problem to be eliminated. And so I think, that's one aspect of, doing inner work. It helped me. But I also think this system has just forced me to slow down in so many ways, and to realize that banging my head against the wall isn't working, and to allow things to happen. That's another huge realization for myself, is, romantically, there's a sense that everything's up to me. Not just romantically, just in general. Everything's up to me. Like, I'm responsible to keep things together. I'm responsible to make the right things happen, and to realize that, I'm not responsible to, I don't have to make everything happen, and things are already happening. There are things that are set in motion. So there can be kind of like a God complex with 8s, in a sense that this is someone who thinks that they have to influence every aspect of their existence, or that everything that happens in their life happened because of their influence. So that can be, I had to grow in order for me to grow. I had to realize that there were things that were happening that were way beyond my influence, that were good for me, and that I had to let things happen to me. And the way the way that I met my partner, I would have never seen it. Like, for me, there's a sense of, I'm going to orchestrate my own reality. And I did not orchestrate this. This is something I had to say yes to. And so that's been a huge shift for me. And it's not like I have like, I've been doing these meditation practices. I've done breath work a couple of times. That's been a big deal. But in terms of actual growth, it's been a few mindset shifts that I've had to make along the way. To, it's like, yo, you need to fucking let go. You need to stop trying to do everything, because it's not all up to you.
Yeah. And what's terrifying about that? Or
well, okay,
but yeah, go ahead. You get the
what's
spirit.
terrifying about that? Well, I mean, I still struggle with boundaries in the sense that the sense of violation that I allowed something into my world that I did not vet, or,
Yes.
like I can't even put words to how violently angry I get if something comes into my world that I didn't. So there's still some hot spots there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Eights are really, big about boundaries and that sense of who is in my world, and so it's a big deal, and it's terrifying in the sense that I could be violated by some outside element that I didn't vet.
Right.
So that's still something I struggle with in the sense that I still don't feel comfortable with that. Like there's a sense of the people in my life were people I intentionally chose to be around, you know
Right. Right. Yeah.
and so there's that sense of there's an inner circle and there's a box. If you're in that
Mhm.
box, you matter. If you're not in that box, fuck you until you're someone who's important. So the
Right.
fact that maybe someone could randomly show up in that box is like, wait, like I still get violently angry about that. But something that I'm realizing, it's ridiculous. If I actually, that's the way my personality is set up. But if I actually, there is kind of like maybe some childhood wounds there. I mean, there's my type structure, but I had a type 8 dad and a type 2 mom. These are very strong personalities, highly
And a type
intrusive
8 sister,
individuals.
right?
Say what?
And a type 8 sister.
And a type 8 sister. So I mean, my family, I didn't realize until grow up, and you just take it for granted that you don't realize that you grew up a certain way and there's certain norms that you grew up with. So
Mhm.
the idea of trusting people that you're close to, it's like in my family, you always had to have your guard up, because I mean, you're either getting roasted or taken advantage of. I mean, it's kind of like just the general family culture, so you just don't think it's a big deal. But
Uh-huh.
even my type 2 mom was it's like you just have to be careful. And my dad was just so yeah. There's a sense of like boundaries are a huge deal, not just because I'm an 8, but just because of the way I grew up. So there's
Mhm.
the wall is really strong with me, and just even just being able to trust people is tough. It's yeah, that's something that I have huge walls, to put it mildly.
Right, right. And then can you tie that into one word that is very often associated with eights that I really like is the word protective.
Hmm.
Um, how do you relate to that?
So one of the things that I didn't identify with, in the initial 8 descriptions that I saw, was like, oh, the protector of the underdog, and
Yeah,
there is a protective element, but it's
the
more
underdog
self.
thing is yeah, right.
That's the part that doesn't. I mean, there are some social 8s out there who would identify with that.
Yeah, yeah.
But if they're really, that might be the way they sell it to you, though. But if they're really being honest, they're protective of their own psychological, territory. It's kind of like
Mhm.
my world is what I'm protecting. So it's more. I did a shift talk where I talked about 8s, and one of the things I said is, if we're close, let's say you're one of my close friends,
Mhm.
I'm protective of you as much as it means that if someone can touch you, they can touch me. I would never, ever let anyone on this planet think that they could even get within 1 degree of 1 degree of me. There's no
Mhm.
way. Like, if you are going, like, people should know that, one, they can't fuck with me. You can't fuck with me at all. Two, if you fuck with one of my friends, like, it's that same box. You should
Mhm.
be afraid to fuck with me or anyone that's close to me. um that's sort of like, you can't touch me, because if you can get close enough to someone I'm close with, you pretty much touched me. And so 8s are protective of themselves. I mean, I don't know if most 8s would be honest enough to say that, but it's
Mhm.
about like the sense of maintaining a separation and an
Yeah.
untouchableness, which means like my family is not someone you can touch. The people that are 1 degree of separation from me, you can't touch. Like,
Mhm.
that's that sense of, if you get into my world, is because I allowed it. not because you thought you could violate me or anyone that's close to me. So
Right.
protective. I'm protective of, you know, the things that I'm involved with, things that I'm passionate about. Like, you know, if anybody in the group has some negative shit to say about the podcast, I'm breathing down there, you know, I'm down their fucking neck, you know, like you're not going to talk about Nancy, you're not going to talk about John, you're not going to talk shit about David in my box. What other people say outside of that, that's their business. But
Yeah.
you know, there's this sense of, with eights of, I mean, this is a crude example, but you know, like tigers in the jungle, they just mark out a certain territory and they just parole the borders to make sure that other tigers don't go into their territory, and they fight about that. I think bears do the same thing, where it's like, if I have this territory, then this is where I can hunt and this is where I can mate. But if I go into somebody else's territory, then I might have to deal with them, or maybe you're trying to take their territory. So I think with eights, it's like, it's that sense of here's my box, and they can expand that box. And that's part of what happens is my box can start out small, and that box gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger until, you know, left unchecked, you get what you have, where most, if not all, dictators have been type 8s. That's what the type 8 personality, unchecked as it expands, just ends up doing. And I want to say this. What ends up happening is a type 8 personality represents like the protective function for people. And from a very young age, I mean, I guess if you want to understand what it's like to be me, before I knew anything about the Enneagram, as a small boy, other kids were coming to me because I was someone that they knew would get results for them that no one else would. Like, you know, how do you get an A on this test? I didn't have any problem giving other kids like the right answers, shit like that. Or I want to get somebody beat up, or, you know, they would come to me for certain things like that. And so I had a reputation for someone who could get things done, which also meant
How old were you?
I don't know, like kindergarten age.
Yeah,
you know,
that's
just
right.
like,
This is so important. I'm so glad you bring this up. It's so important to understand. It's
right.
like you don't choose the flavor of your
You don't choose. No. Yeah. This is just what you came up with. You know, I've always said that I've always felt like an adult in a kid's body. I felt like I just knew things that other kids didn't understand, about consequences, about intimidation. Like, nobody teaches you that. You just sort of like instinctually know how to do these things. And so, you know, like I had one example as a very young kid where somebody was messing with my sister, and I had enough kids who I'd done things for that I could go to them and say, I need you to, you know, I'm here to collect on my favor. And so I got 4 of the boys and go found this kid who was messing with my sister, and we gave him the beating of a lifetime. And, you know, word gets out that this happened. I'm not going to get into the details of what, how bad of a beating I gave this kid, but word gets out, and people just know, do not ever mess with Emeka or his sister. And that's at a very young age. I mean, and so there's an understanding of leverage with the 8 personality, in the sense that I want to stay separate from people, but I also want people to have a reason to come to me. And so 8s are the kind of personality that would be minding their own business in their own little box, just working on whatever they're working on, but they're creating a reason for other people to deal with them. I don't want to get into the whole politics of what's going on right now over in Russia, but, you know, the only reason like Russia has leverage is because they had access to oil, and Putin put himself in a position where other world countries have to deal with him. Otherwise, you know, he's just a third
thing. Yeah,
exactly. So it's 8s on some level as rejection types, are putting themselves in a position where they don't need, you know, anything from anyone, but people need things from them. And so they're overdoing the protection function. And that was there from a very young age. And I didn't even realize I was doing that, but it's just, I've always had kids around me that rely on me for something that I'm not relying on for anything.
Right. Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up. There's one thing I wanted to just kind of highlight for people who've never met you before, who are experiencing you for the first time, is this sense of when you were describing the 8 and you were talking about how, like, if 8s are protective of themselves, and if they're, you know, some 8s, maybe social 8s, wouldn't agree, they have a sense of protecting a larger group of people or something like that. And that's, but the phrase you used was something like, if they got really honest with themselves, what they're really protecting their own psychological territory.
Yep.
I just wanted to point out, like, this is the kind of thing that you say that is provocative, you know, and it's like, you know, like I could imagine an 8 listening to that and being like, what the fuck? Like, hold on a second, you know? So I'm curious. I just want to put my finger on that dynamic. And also I'm curious to hear you talk about, like, and I know you mentioned this a little bit, but like, why be blunt or shocking or put these kinds of truths on the table?
Well, one thing I want to say is I didn't even realize that I was being shocking or blunt or provocative. Okay. I had to learn that was, you know, because when I left for college, like, I mean, just imagine if you didn't know that you were a lion of some sort. You grew up in a lion's den, and you went out into the world and you just thought you were just like everyone else. And you start dealing with and playing around with other people, but you don't realize that people don't talk the way you do. And you didn't grow up, you know, if you've ever seen like a pride of lions, the way that they communicate, it's really rough. It's really, I mean, they basically like bite and fight each other until the other lion puts up some kind of boundary. So, I grew up in a family like that had a pretty strong 8-ish, you know, personality overlay. And it wasn't until I went to college that I realized that people don't talk to people the way my family does. I mean, if you just see us interact, it seems like everyone's fighting or being really loud and aggressive, and it's not necessarily even a cultural thing or anything like that, because there are plenty of other similar families that just have different personalities. I've come to realize, like, yeah, this a lot of assertive types in my family, a lot of 8 personality, a lot of 8 fixation stuff going on here. And so I had to learn that I can't talk to people the way, you know, I talk to my family. So, but even still, I had to recognize, I don't think I even realize how provocative, you know, I'm being. I don't even think I view myself as provocative as other people view myself. Because I think most 8s won't see that. Most 8s won't recognize that they're really provocative and they're really, you know, forcing people to look at, you know, negative truths in ways that are uncomfortable. But that's part of the sort of like that ignition thing. They don't realize that they're starting fires everywhere.
And also, there's one nuance that's, I feel like, important to add in the context of you, Emeka, is also that you're sexual dominant and social blind, which creates.
There you go. Yes.
Also has a
right. And so, like, if I was, my dad is a social self-pres 8 wing 9, and so he's a little bit more diplomatic, but he's still a blunt person. I think if you look at the range of different 8s, I mean, you can go from 8s that are a little colder, like, you know, I don't want to get too much into Putin's typing, but we've got him as an 8 wing 9, 853. And so he's really icy, but, you know, there's still really blunt personality and really can be really provocative. And that personality is going to be provocative as a reactive type. But I don't think reactive types realize how provocative they're being. And so it's just kind of like, this is the baseline. And it's funny how this shows up in people doing typing videos, and the 8s will get on there and just be talking about how terrible of a person they are, or, you know, just casually, you know, saying things that people will be like, oh my God, you know, but it's harder to see in yourself. It's easier for me to see it in other 8s. It's easier to see, oh, wow, this is a really aggressive person. Sometimes I don't see it at all. Sometimes I don't see it at all because I think that's just a person being normal. And I don't see that they're, you know, just being, but I want to know what's going on. I want to know what people really think. And so I don't think I realize how much I'm controlling. My personality is controlling, or my personality is pushing people into certain, you know, psychological corners and things like that. I don't realize that that's happening.
I have, let's see, a couple other questions. One thing actually that is so funny to me about this particular topic is, and to hear you say, you know, I don't really think of myself even as that provocative person from the inside. Like, you don't experience yourself as being provocative.
Yeah.
But also me as a social type, I'm thinking to myself, but also, wait a minute, but you also created the Not a 4 Instagram account, which
okay. Let me put it this way. Like, real quick,
can you just give some what is Not a 4?
Okay, like, I did not originate originate the movement. To me, way before my time, David. Dave, I want to give credit to where credit's due. David, back in the day with the Enneagram Institute discussion boards, was he's an OG. He's been at this for over 3 decades. And so he was one of the ones because most people will come to the Enneagram and mistype as 4. So he was one of the ones on those forums who would, be providing long distinctions about why certain celebrities and certain people were incorrectly typed as 4. And so once we all met on Enneagram Facebook, that continued when we started our group, because everyone mistypes as 4. Like in MBTI communities, it's INFJ. Like there's all these pet types that people tend to mistype as. But I recognized that this is a problem, but it is also a hook that, what we really wanted people to do is to take the Enneagram seriously, to look deeper than what was there. And the only reason that people were mistyping as 4 was because of really bad information. And I needed to find something, a hook that was impossible to ignore, that would get under someone's skin and force them to go back and reevaluate, go back and and a lot of, especially attachment types kind of just latch on to whatever is presented. And so this was something that needed to be unforgettable, that would force somebody to go back and read some more books. Maybe you should reconsider if you are the type you think you are. But it also kind of, you needed something like that to get people prepared for the gauntlet of typing, because typing is so upsetting, because 9 times out of 10 people are not the type they think they are. And so, the not a 4 thing, was just a clever hashtag, but it was also kind of, I'm looking at the landscape of the Enneagram and I'm trying to bring people along in the sort of path that I've been on, which is you're going to have to look deeper at this stuff. Like the Enneagram is so rich, and you're not going to get it from the, quick descriptions. The reasons people are mistyping as 4 is they're just going based on these quick descriptions. And so, yes, there is intentional provocative things that I do that are intentional for a purpose. I know that I'm aware that I'm a provocative person. I fuck with people all the time, but I don't think I'm as provocative as other people might experience me as provocative, because I'm like that all the time. But yeah, I you've been around me. I do mess around with people nonstop. It's fun. But like it's just part of my personality. And I think most 8s are on some level don't think it's that big of a deal. As much as other people might think.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk about just typing for a little bit, and then we'll probably come to a close pretty soon. But
okay,
one of the things that I just think that Enneagrammer and the Enneagrammer universe is so interesting and so intelligent. And my phrasing for it is they're reverent to the right things and irreverent to everything else.
Yes, absolutely.
And what I mean by that is that there's a way that you and the Enneagrammer team are taking really seriously, as a kind of, like, you hold so sacredly and preciously, like, the truth that the Enneagram is revealing about the authentic nature of the psyche.
Right.
And the way that you kind of get there is you occupy sort of in the whole Enneagram universe, not Enneagrammer universe, the Enneagram world. I think a really interesting and important place in the ecosystem. Yes. And one of the things that you have sort of distinguished your Enneagrammer from the Enneagram world, or one of the ways that you distinguish yourself, is that Enneagrammer actually provides typing services where you make unequivocal evaluations of people, and you say, this is your type, and here is your instinctual stack, your tri-type, your wing. You give the whole thing. In fact, you even just came out with a product, just to let people know, called Apex Typing, which is you and the Enneagrammer folks actually watch a video submission of someone and then do live commentary on that submission. Do I have that right?
Yes. It's called Apex Commentaries, but yes.
Okay, cool. And also, there's a whole thing about collages, and basically, you've come up with some really, really interesting and fresh, innovative ways of typing people. But what I want to hone in on is that your perspective on typing people, having a person be typed, is itself controversial in the Enneagram world, because in the Enneagram world, many teachers and I'm actually not even 100% sure where I stand on this, to be honest with you.
Sure.
But what the kind of traditional line is in the Enneagram world is that the journey to discovering your type is this whole thing, and it's really sacred and important, and what's going on in a person's inner world is potentially, well, how do I put it? It's their responsibility and their privilege and their journey to go through it. And sort of, so what if someone's mistyped? Maybe it's useful for them for a little while before they discover their real type. And so when you go to a place like the narrative tradition, they'll give their whole typing framework is they do an interview with you. They ask you a bunch of questions, and then they give you, I've taken that class. They instruct you specifically not to say only one type. They instruct you to say, I'm seeing a lot of type, say 3, but also I'm seeing a lot of 6 and potentially some 7. So I recommend you go read about all this and see what resonates with you. Basically, Enneagrammer says, no. Here's what your type is. So can you just say a little, or clarify?
Let me clarify. It's not that, I guess I know what we're saying that about types is that on one hand, it is a personal experience of awakening, that even if I type you and say that I think you're typing, here's why, it doesn't mean anything if this doesn't light something up in you and open up some eyes, like you are able to see certain things about yourself, where a light bulb goes off, and then you have to do the inner work yourself. And so I say that a typing is just a framework to better understand something that's already happening. And accurate typing is just to get you to actually get on the right page with what's actually happening. Now, people say that, I've heard this before, that it might be useful for someone to mistype for years, and they could learn a lot from applying, inner work from another type perspective. And that may be true, but I believe that the Enneagram is extremely powerful. It's such a sharp knife that if you do find your type and you do see it, that it is such a life-changing, and it just strips you naked in such a powerful way that it doesn't compare. Like if you were doing inner work as a 6 and then you figured out that you were a 3 and that's your actual type, it is going to illuminate so many important things that that's why we're so blatant about this stuff, because we know like how powerful it is to get on the other side of this process, because it's such a life-changing experience to actually discover what your actual type is. And so on one hand, what we've created, people, a lot of attachment types, 3, 6, and 9, are already doing the thing where they're attaching to situations or attaching to people and sort of giving away their own self-agency. And what we try to do is encourage people, like, this is still about you, but you can stay at home and put on some clothes and think that you look amazing. But at some point, you need to go look in a mirror. You need a reflection back to yourself to make sure you don't have a hole in the back of your jeans. Or you might have to go to a stylist or a professional, somebody who knows what they're doing, to help you put the shit together. And so, we go to therapists, we go to experts who can give us another perspective and mirror back to us our blind spots, things that we are not able to see in ourselves. And there's some aspects of my typing that I could not get on my own. I had to have people who, like if 5 people who know you well, who aren't idiots, who can make some observations about you, you should take those notes, because you probably can't see those things about yourself. And even better, if strangers who have no investment in who you are as a person can make some observations about you, that's even better data that you can say, if enough people say that I'm provocative, it's true. It doesn't matter what I think about myself or how I'm experiencing myself. It's true. Like that's just how people experience me. And the point is, how I experience myself is not matching what's actually happening. And that's why we have to awaken to what is actually going on, because we're just asleep to the program that we're running all the time. So that's what we try to tell people, is like, you're going to get it wrong, because how do you see yourself? So this idea that only you can figure it out. Only you can identify what your type is. Like, that's the whole point of why we're doing this, is that if we could do it on our own, we wouldn't need the Enneagram. So like, there's this sense of, I need to actually consider the possibility that everything I think about myself is completely off. It's completely wrong. And so what we've done is created tools and processes for people to observe themselves, but also get independent, unbiased observations. Like, even people making a video of themselves, making collages of themselves, that the process of watching themselves, it's almost like another person. It really helps drive it home. Like, wow, I didn't know I was really like this. I didn't know that. And so that process is illuminating. And then the other side of it is just the skill set of typing itself. Like, these types are real. They're not just words on a page or ideas. They're happening in real time, which is the whole reason why we can do inner work, is that there are implications. If you keep doing 3, or you keep doing 8, or you keep doing 6 in these incremental decisions over the course of months and years, certain themes, certain perspectives get crystallized, and they're observable in real time. Instincts are significant because you're having instinctual reactions moment to moment. It's a lens to see the world. And that's so interesting to me. That's almost like you're in a different world that I'm in. We're not in the same world. And so just to kind of like understand what world someone is coming from, and to see that these type perspectives are playing out all the time. Everyone thinks that their world is the only world. And so to part of what I really enjoy doing is to make something invisible that no one can see, and make it visible, such as like a type, in a real way that you can't ignore it anymore. So, like the last year, we've typed a lot of people who are attachment types. And I just noticed that people didn't know what attachment was. And, this can help you, explain what my personality does. Like, I can see a large scale problem and think, all right, there are a lot of attachment types that know that they're attachment types, but don't understand, can't see it because it's kind of like the norm. So how do I, like, I was trying to figure out, how do I make something invisible like this visible? And so that's where the hexad versus attachment stuff came out. Because I was like, there's a huge divide that I'm not understanding about attachment types. And if I can make this distinction, hexad types will immediately get it. And if hexad types will immediately get this distinction, then we can sort of start to make attachment visible. And it took a year. But now people know what attachment is a little bit more than they did the year before. And so what I find really interesting about typing is that a lot of these ideas and a lot of these distinctions just they're invisible. And you kind of have to, I just want to bring this stuff to life in a way that it's undeniable. Like, these types are not just, they have real implications for inner work, which means it's real. It's happening today, this moment. You're making decisions that are adding up over the course of months and years that are going to put you in a certain place. And maybe your type is 6. You're making 6, shaped decisions moment to moment. If your instincts are social, you're making social instinct shaped decisions. And to see that, you can make a 10-minute video and we can identify that. Incredible. Consistently, year after year, we can identify these distinctions. And so that might sound crazy and controversial to people, but if you can wrap your head around that, I feel like the Enneagram now becomes like a living, breathing thing. These are not just typologies and types that we identify with, but this is what we're doing. This is how we're living. These are the decisions we're making. And so in a way, like, studying the Enneagram has been like doing self-therapy in a way, because like these powerful, like, to recognize that, I am in a type structure that is so distinct and is so limiting. And I think this is what reality is. And everyone else is doing the same thing. And if you can see it, that's the first step in sort of like, I guess, being able to escape the matrix. You have to see it first.
I'm hearing a lot of, first of all, that was amazing. That was your Oscar-winning moment. I actually really found that inspiring and super valuable. And I love your perspective on this whole stuff. And I can feel the place that it comes from.
Yes.
And I'm hearing a lot of the just the wisdom, the soul of the 8 come through in your answer here. The sense of like, let's make it real.
Yes.
Let's make it real. Like
Right.
it's not happening. It doesn't exist in an abstraction. It exists in you right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. We just did a Egypt episode, and John is really passionate about Egypt, and one of the things that he said is that Egypt is a civilization that really valued inner life, but it wasn't just a philosophy. It's a philosophy that materialized in these incredible, precise pyramids, and and that will last for thousands and thousands of years. And so it's one thing to do inner work. I guess what the 8 personality brings to the table is a realization, materializing what's inside out there in the world. And so I want to, what I want to do with inner work in crazy, entertaining, or whatever ways, is to really put this stuff as a moment to moment experience for people, that in a way that you can't avoid it. It's easier to avoid words on a page and to discount it as just ideas. But when you go up to a fucking pyramid and you see, how the fuck did these people put millions of blocks together, like, it makes you stop and consider that you don't know anything. And so that's why I've been really excited about the stuff that we've created, like the collage exercise, the typing process that because I want people to actually experience the Enneagram, like actually practice it, to have the Enneagram to be part of their lives. Like, this is not just ideas. You can learn about look at relationships differently with the Enneagram. Like, this has real implications in your real life right now. And I think that's why our group is so active, is that I think I'm at the point where I know the Enneagram pretty well, but it's like so many untapped avenues in trying to understand how the Enneagram can be used to see through certain areas of life, to see through the bullshit, and to really get at the heart of what's really going on in certain areas. And so that's what I'm excited to do, is just to make the Enneagram real.
Fuck yeah. I love it. That feels like a really good place to end, but I'm going to push it just one more question.
Sure. Yeah.
And this is going to be a little bit more of a kind of basic Enneagram question, but something I get all the time, and a lot of people that I work with are people in business and investors and people like that who want to know, like, I have an 8 boss, or I have an 8 partner, or something like that. How do I interact with them in a way that's healthy, or that, like, if they're being really forceful or something like that. So can you speak a little bit to that? Like, what advice you give to actually maybe both sides, both 8s and also people who have 8s in their lives?
Okay. So I think if someone is an 8, this is going to be difficult to realize, but I think what 8s need to realize is, like you said, they are more provocative than they realize, that they're more forceful, and that it's hard to see yourself. And as an 8, it's hard to see how others might be, about your energy, about there's so much. It's not even that you're necessarily aggressive, but there's so much unspoken threat and unspoken energetic push just at standstill with the 8 personality. And it's not really to say that an 8 needs to do that, just first be able to see yourself a little bit, to see that people are experiencing that there are not very many avenues to get to you, that there is a sense that you're controlling, even though you might not be explicitly controlling, that there are very few options on how they can deal with you, that they have to play on your terms. And and so it helps to contextualize how people might react to certain things you do. I mean, there are things that I could say that other people could say, and people won't react the same way, just because of the kind of energy that I have as a baseline. So there's that. And I guess the hard thing that 8s need to do as part of their inner work is to recognize that they can allow things to happen. That there's a sense that if I want good outcomes, especially outcomes that I want, then I have to influence them. And that, and also, at least for me, I trust people who I know can generate the outcomes that I want. And if someone if they demonstrate that they don't have the ability to do that, then I feel compelled to step in, do it myself. So there's this sense of we need to get to done as soon as possible, and I'm want to shape that. And so one of the hardest things that I've had to learn to do is that it's not up to me. It's not all up to me. And that there is room for me to let things breathe and to step back. And I think that's going to be difficult for a lot of eights to do, but it's to actually see that there is a unfolding of action that I don't have to be influencing. There are things that can happen if I just let things happen. Now, of course, I mean, one has to be wise in how they do that. But there's been some amazing things that have happened that were completely outside of my influence. And I think every eight needs to understand that that's a possibility, that that's something that they can allow things to unfold instead of, carrying everything. And so then for people who are dealing with eights, one thing to watch out for with eights is the rejection piece of the personality, where eights might be doing all this stuff that they're might feel controlling because they feel like this is what the situation needs. And so it can be hurtful to an eight to be told that they're controlling, because that will inevitably trigger this sense of, well, the only reason I'm even in this situation is because I care. And the part of the eight that just wants to cut off from everything or feels cut off from everything gets triggered in the sense that I'm only here because I give a shit. And so if you're telling me that I'm controlling you or you don't like what I'm doing, I'm just backing off completely. And so I think it's important to recognize, if you're dealing with an eight, like where they're coming from with what they're doing. They might seem provocative or they might seem controlling, to see that, their intentions are not to control. It's like they think that they think that they're serving the situation. They think that they are doing something that group or situation or whatever needs. And so I think it's important to, if you can see where an eight is coming from, what the true heart. I mean, of course, there are eights that are trying to control things, but you can get an eight to shut down very quickly if you point out that you might feel that they have those bad intentions. Then you might not get an eight to cooperate anymore, in the sense that they're just like, I'm done. Like, you just do it yourself. Right. So you don't want to trigger that over independent sort of mindset. So I think it's important to recognize that, see the eight personality for what it is, and also set some clear boundaries. Because here's the thing, if you invite an eight in and give them the reins and say, I trust you to handle this for me, make sure that that's what you want, because they're going to do that. It's the issue really that I've run into is sometimes people give me the reins. I mean, usually what I've learned to do is I wait for people to fuck it up so bad that I'm, the obvious choice. And I pick it up, because at that point it's like, I know what I'm doing. You obviously don't know what you're doing. You know that. I know that. There's no issue. But sometimes people give me the reins and I take control of something, and then they come around to say that I'm controlling them, or I took control of the situation. It's like, just be clear about what you want to, give ownership to. If you're going to tell an eight that I want you to handle this, they're going to handle it. Just be sure that that's what you want. I think, as long as people are clear and they set clear boundaries, they won't have any issues working with eights. I appreciate people who their yeses and nos are clear. Not to say that, not to say that you can't change your mind, but just contradictory stuff can be tough to deal with, because the eights are like, just let me know, yes or no. If you don't want me involved, I won't be involved. If you want me involved, this is what I'm willing to do. Eights can be really easy to work with if you're direct and you're clear. That's it.
What about the one case if I hear so many people talk about my boss as an eight.
Yeah. And they're probably not, though, but that's the archetype that gets, the archetype that's blamed on eights is anyone who's bossy and, all that stuff. My boss is an eight, or my boyfriend's an eight, my husband's an eight. It's like, they're probably not. They might be eight fixed, they might have some eight influence, but they're probably not an eight. Because the thing about eights, they're not necessarily micromanagers. They're not micromanager types. Eights are going to expect you to stand on your own and handle your shit. And they're going to hold you accountable to the thing that you said that you were going to handle, So their bosses are probably not eights, but in terms of what people might be imagining eight energy is, I don't think people really understand how separate eights can be in their perspective, which
Like their
can
inner
feel,
experience of themselves
yeah,
feeling
well,
separate.
no,
Yeah.
in general, just like if you're working with an eight, there's a sense of kind of a separation. It's not messy. Like it's like, I'm doing this, you're doing this, we're gonna meet. Like there's a sense of clear boundaries uh with eights. I mean, don't get me wrong, eights are gonna expect things to happen very quickly. So they're gonna push
Mhm.
you, but
Mhm.
you're always gonna know where you stand with eights. And so a lot of times when people say, hey, my boss is an eight because he flew off and yelled at me or this and that, it's like, yeah, you have a boss who's aggressive. That's doesn't mean that they have the eight personality. They probably
Right.
don't.
Right.
And also it's just also knowing just how rare eights are in comparison to all the other types. It's a pretty low percentage, so
Mhm.
it's probably not eight. But if you are dealing with an eight, it's gonna be very obvious, be if based on what I've explained and what the eight type structure is, like that the combination of rejection, reactivity, and assertiveness, it can feel really alienating to a lot of people who are
Right. Right.
attachment types. So that's a very distinct personality.
Yeah. And just one thing I want to highlight too is I think your phrasing around the not triggering the shutdown response or the independent shutdown,
Yes.
that's really fascinating to me.
Yeah.
Um, and I mean, one word that gets used a lot with eights when we're talking about like really getting under the hood is their sensitivity, which is often so misunderstood.
Yes. Yeah.
You know,
That's a
and
big deal.
could you just connect those dots a little bit?
Well, the y- it's like eights are sensitive too. It's just, it's hidden under, it's just hard to reach. It feels like an amputated part of yourself, but it's still there.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
but what generally happens when eights feel like a part of themselves that they don't want to be touched is touched, or they, like let's say someone accuses me of being controlling when I had good intentions or whatever. I was just like, well, okay, I'm
Yeah.
done. I'm just backing off completely. I'm completely disengaging. And I didn't really understand that whole line of five thing until I saw it in other eights. I was I was like in a bar, and an eight, I knew she was an eight. It was like, she was obviously like a social eight, had
Okay.
hit on me. And it was just kind of this weird thing where she wanted me to respond in certain ways. And when I didn't, she completely disengaged. And I was like, oh, I do that. So it took me to
Ah,
see how, you know, there's, as a rejection type, there's a way that you're already assuming that you don't need something or that you're not welcome somewhere. And so when someone confirms that or says something that touches that,
mhm.
it immediately says, well, I never needed that to begin with. That's the rejection
Yeah.
type
Which, by the way,
message.
258. Those are
Yeah,
the rejection.
258
Mhm.
is like, I never needed that to begin with. And it's kind of like an immediate amputation. And so you
Ah,
don't, if you're dealing with an eight, you don't want to trigger that, because it's almost like, if you're telling an eight, you're not welcome in a place where they thought that they were welcome, they're gonna just default to, well, I never needed this situation to begin with. I'm not even
ah,
supposed to be here. So, you know, so they completely can cut off from that situation. And so eights have been doing that their whole life, is, I never needed that to begin with. I never needed you to begin with. And so that's the touchy part. That's a touchy spot of eight that doesn't seem vulnerable, but is, in a sense
right.
that it's not like an eight actually needs anything. But if you confirm to an eight that their presence was not welcome in a situation because you feel like they're too much, that's the reaction that can happen on the other side, is like, well, I don't even care about this anyway.
Mm,
Like,
that
for
makes
real, not like some types that say that they don't care
yeah,
about something, but they actually
it's
care.
sincere.
It's
Yeah,
a
this is
sincere, like,
yeah,
amputation. Like, I never even, gave a shit about this anyway.
right, right. Wow. Um, well, okay. Um, Emeka, you're honestly, I mean, I love the way you talk about the Enneagram. It's so rich, and it always makes me think a lot about things that I haven't thought a lot about before. So thank you. Is there anything that you would want to end on, or anything that I haven't asked you, or
No,
about your
like,
experience?
I would just say, yeah, I mean, people who are interested in watching your YouTube series or course or whatever this might end up being, is that, you know, the Enneagram is a very, very powerful tool. Like, and they might be aware of other personality systems, but this is the real deal. Like, this can actually change your fucking life, change your organization, change group dynamics. It's changed my life, and so part of my mission is to make it unignorable. You know, you know, that's really what it is. Make it to something where everyone knows what I know. That's what I want.
My sincere response to that is I feel kind of emboldened myself, actually, because I feel mission aligned in a certain
Yes.
sense to what you're bringing.
Yeah.
As a person who cares a lot about the Enneagram myself, so thanks for kind of bringing that energy.
Yes. That's what I do. St. Juice.
Yeah, man. St. Juice. That's good. Okay, so if you want to discover more of Emeka's work, you can find him a lot of places. Enneagrammer.com, the Big Hormone Enneagram Podcast, Enneagrammer Facebook group, Not a For Instagram account, which I'm not actually sure you're even doing anymore. But
I mean, I don't do it anymore, but I mean, it's more of a movement now. But yeah, Dark Arts Academy also. People can find me there.
Okay, which is, can you say 2 seconds about that?
It's a weekly class. You know, we do videos where we walk through play-by-play typing a celebrity. And so, you know, we talk all this stuff I've been saying about typing. I think people have been asking us to teach courses about typing to help people understand what the hell we're doing. But now we are doing a weekly. I mean, people have joined and being able to watch what we're doing to pick up like, oh, these types are real, and people are picking up the skill of recognizing the types as they're happening in real time. So it's $19 a month to watch these weekly classes that we do, about 1 hour each, where me, Joseph, and David are, you know, group typing someone and discussing. It's kind of like a podcast about typing live video. So it's great. It's fun. And it's easy to get into.
That's super. I actually didn't know you were doing that, and I'm interested. So we'll see.
We just need to get better.
That's very cool.
We need to get better at promoting it, because I mean, it's only been going for about 5 months, and it's going well. But we just haven't. You know, we've just been focusing on, you know, doing it on a weekly basis and getting the people in the group aware that it exists. But at some point, I think a lot of more people are going to be really interested in, you know, watching those videos.
Cool. Emeka, thank you so much, man.
This has been fun. This has been great. I am always happy to work with people who are super passionate about this stuff, and it's really rare that someone who's producing, you know, original stuff of their own, adding their own touch to the Enneagram. So I'm excited to, you know, do this with you, and this is a lot of fun.
Feeling is mutual.